The wedding is off. I don't love you anymore.
Ethan Miller said it loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. The Saturday lunch crowd at a busy Italian restaurant in San Diego, California, went completely silent. I could feel 30 pairs of eyes swing toward our table by the window, the one he had specifically requested when we walked in. I sat there for a beat, my fork still hovering over my chicken parmesan. His words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. At the table beside us, his friends, the ones he insisted join us for what he called a casual weekend lunch, watched with barely disguised anticipation. My name is Claire Thompson and I am 27 years old. In that moment, sitting across from the man I had spent 4 years of my life with, something inside me shifted quietly. It was not a break. It was like a lock clicking into place. I set my fork down carefully. Ethan stared at me with an expression I had seen before but never fully understood until that second. Satisfaction mixed with anticipation, like a child waiting to see what happens when you pull the wings off a butterfly. "Thank you for being honest," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. His eyebrows lifted a fraction. That was not the reaction he expected. I reached for my left hand and slowly removed the engagement ring, the one he had proposed with at his parents' anniversary dinner 2 years ago, making sure everyone was watching then too. I slipped it into my jacket pocket. "You know what?" I continued, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "I think I'm going to throw a narrow escape party." One of his friends snorted and a couple of others chuckled. Ethan's smirk deepened. He was enjoying this. And I realized he had choreographed the whole moment, picked the setting, invited the witnesses, so he could watch me crumble in public. But I did not crumble. "A narrow escape party," I repeated, more to myself than to anyone else. "Yes. I think that's exactly what this calls for." The laughter from his friends died down when they noticed I wasn't crying. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't making a scene the way Ethan had clearly expected. Instead, I reached for my water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. "Claire," Ethan said, his voice carrying an edge now. "Did you hear what I said?" "I heard you perfectly," I replied. "You don't love me anymore. The wedding is off. And I believe I already thanked you for your honesty." His jaw tightened. This was not going according to his plan. I pulled my wallet from my purse and placed enough cash on the table to cover my portion of the meal, plus a generous tip for the server, who was probably going to have an interesting story to tell after her shift. "I have to say, Ethan, you picked quite a setting for this announcement," I said, standing and gathering my things. "A crowded restaurant on a Saturday afternoon. Your friends conveniently here to witness everything. Very theatrical." His face reddened slightly. "I thought you deserved the truth." "And I got it," I said simply. "More truth than you probably intended to give me." I looked at his friends, Luke Harris, Aaron Cole, and Mark Reynolds, who were now trading uncomfortable glances. The amusement had drained from their faces, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. "Gentlemen," I said, nodding toward them, "thank you for being here today. Your presence has been illuminating." As I walked toward the exit, I could feel the weight of every stare in that restaurant. But instead of shame or humiliation, I felt something else entirely. Clarity. For years. I had given Ethan 4 years of my life. And in one carefully orchestrated moment, he had shown me exactly who he was. Not accidentally. Not in a rush of emotion. Deliberately. He had planned this public execution of our relationship the way some people plan a party. Well, before we continue, write what city you are from. It is important for us to know where our stories reach. The cold air outside hit my face and I took a deep breath. My hands were not shaking. My eyes were dry. I walked to my car in the lot outside the restaurant with measured steps, unlocked the door and sat behind the wheel. Only then, in the privacy of my own vehicle, did I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. But it wasn't devastation that washed over me. It was recognition. I had just watched Ethan reveal his true self, and the person he revealed was not someone I wanted to marry. The realization felt almost liberating. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend, Rachel Moore. "How was lunch?" I stared at the message for a moment before typing back. "Wedding is cancelled. I'll explain later." but I am okay. Actually, I think I am better than okay. Her response came immediately. What? I'm coming over tonight. I put the phone down and started the car. As I pulled out of the lot outside the restaurant, I glanced back at the window one more time. I could see Ethan still at our table. His friends were gathered around him now. He was probably telling them I was in shock, that I hadn't fully processed what happened yet. He had no idea what was actually happening. He had just handed me the key to a door I hadn't even realized was locked. The drive home gave me time to think, and what I thought about were all the moments I had chosen not to see clearly over the past 4 years. I had met Ethan when I was 23, fresh out of college and working my first job as an assistant event coordinator at an event venue in downtown San Diego. He was 25 then, a marketing associate at a pharmaceutical distribution company. Confident and charming in that way that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room when he focuses on you. Our first date was at a cafe by the water. He listened intently as I talked about my dream of eventually starting my own event planning business. He nodded at all the right moments, asked all the right questions. Looking back now, I realized he had been gathering information rather than genuinely connecting. By the end of our first year together, I had started adjusting my life around his preferences. He didn't like my college friends, so I saw them less. He thought my apartment was too far from his office, so I moved closer to his side of town. He said my dream of starting a business was risky and that I should focus on climbing the corporate ladder at my current job. So I put my entrepreneurial plans on hold. I told myself these were compromises. That's what relationships were about, right? Give and take. But the giving had been almost entirely mine. When I defended Ethan to my friends and family, I found myself repeating excuses I had heard other women make for partners who didn't deserve them. He's just stressed from work. He didn't mean it that way. You don't know him like I do. My mother had pulled me aside at Christmas last year, her eyes full of concern. Claire, honey, Mom asked, does Ethan make you happy? Truly happy? I brushed off her question with a practiced smile. Of course, Mom. We're getting married. But happy was not the word I would have used if I had been honest with myself. Comfortable maybe. Established. Invested. I had put so much of myself into the relationship that the idea of it not working out felt like admitting to 4 years of failure. The engagement had come 18 months into our relationship. Ethan had proposed at his parents' 40th anniversary party, getting down on one knee in front of their entire extended family and social circle. I had said yes with 200 people watching, phones raised, recording the moment. What else could I say? That was when I should have recognized the pattern. Ethan loved an audience. He loved being the center of attention. He loved moments that made him look good in front of other people. The proposal wasn't really about us. It was about the performance. The wedding planning became another series of compromises that only went one direction. I wanted a small ceremony with close family and friends. Ethan wanted a grand event with 300 guests, most of whom I had never met. I wanted a simple venue that reflected our personalities. Ethan wanted the most expensive large hotel event hall in the city, because that was where his business contacts expected people of his status to celebrate. Every time I pushed back, he had a way of making me feel unreasonable. This is not just about you, Claire. This is about our future. The people at this wedding are people we need for our careers. Our careers. He meant his career. My job as an event coordinator didn't require impressing pharmaceutical executives and their wives. But I gave in again and again because somewhere along the way I stopped trusting my own judgment. Ethan had a talent for making his preferences sound like logical necessities while my desires sounded like emotional indulgences. I pulled into the driveway of my apartment building and sat in the car for a few more minutes, thinking about all the subtle ways he had enjoyed having power over me. There was the time he corrected my pronunciation at a dinner party, making it sound like a joke while making sure everyone knew I had been wrong. There was the way he complimented me in public and criticized me in private. My clothes, my hair, the way I told stories. There were the plans he made without asking me, and then the way he acted hurt if I showed any frustration. And then there was the money. Ethan made more than I did and he never let me forget it. He paid for expensive dinners and vacations, but those gestures came with invisible strings attached. When I tried to contribute or suggested more affordable options, he would shake his head and say, "Let me handle it." You don't need to worry about money. What he meant was, I control this. You don't get to make these decisions. I had been so focused on making the relationship work that I hadn't noticed how small I had become inside it. The woman who had once dreamed of starting her own business now asked permission to go to lunch with her own friends. The woman who had once had strong opinions about everything now deferred to Ethan's judgment on nearly every decision. Sitting in my car, I felt the weight of those 4 years differently than I had just an hour earlier. This was not the end of a love story. This was an escape route I hadn't known I needed. My phone buzzed again. It was Ethan. That was not the reaction I expected. We should talk. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. Then I did something I had not done in 4 years. I did not respond. That evening, Rachel arrived at my place with 2 bottles of wine and a look of fierce determination on her face. Tell me everything, Rachel said, settling onto my couch. And I mean everything. Don't leave out a single detail. So I did. I told her about the restaurant, the announcement, his friends watching like spectators at a game, the way he'd requested that exact table, the way he'd insisted his friends come along, and how the whole thing felt staged from the second we walked in. As I talked, Rachel's face moved from worry to understanding to something that looked a lot like vindication. I knew it, she said quietly. I knew something was wrong with that guy. You did, I admitted. You've been my best friend since freshman year. You watched me change over the past 4 years. The girl who used to argue with professors and stay up all night working on her business plan started asking permission just to get coffee with you. She exhaled like she'd been holding that truth in for a long time. Do you know how many times I wanted to say something? Heat rose in my cheeks. Why didn't you? Because you weren't ready to hear it, she said gently. And because if I pushed too hard he would have used it to isolate you even more. I was waiting for you to see it yourself. Her words settled over me like something heavy and comforting at the same time. She had been watching. Waiting. Protecting our friendship by not forcing a confrontation I would have defended against. The thing that bothers me most, I said slowly, is that he planned it. This wasn't impulsive. He picked a public place. He invited witnesses. He wanted to humiliate me in front of people. Rachel nodded. He wanted to break you. He wanted everyone to see me fall apart so he could look like the one in control, I said. But I didn't fall apart. No, she said, a small smile appearing. You didn't. And I bet that's driving him absolutely crazy right now. As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan Miller. I think you're in shock. This isn't like you. Call me when you're ready to have a real conversation. What does he want? Rachel asked. He thinks I'm in shock, I said. He's confused that I'm not begging him to reconsider. Rachel let out a laugh, but there was no humor in it. Of course he is. Men like Ethan expect a certain reaction. Tears. Desperation. Bargaining. When they don't get it, they don't know what to do. I set my phone face down on the coffee table. His friends were laughing at first. When I took off the ring and said I was throwing a narrow escape party, they thought it was hilarious. Like I was some delusional woman who didn't understand what was happening. Rachel tipped her head. So what made them stop laughing? I thought about it. I think it was when I didn't fall apart. When I thanked him and walked out with my head up, they didn't know how to react. Rachel poured us each a glass of wine and handed one to me. So this narrow escape party, are you actually going to do it? The idea had hit me in the restaurant without warning. A deflection born from an instinct I didn't fully understand at the time. But the more I sat with it, the more it made sense. You know what I think it is? I said. Not for the reasons he probably thinks. Not to mock him or stir up drama. I want to reclaim the narrative before he rewrites it. What do you mean? Rachel asked. Ethan is going to tell people his version, I said. He's going to paint himself as the hero who had to end things with a woman who wasn't right for him. He's going to make me look pathetic or unstable or both. But if I throw a party celebrating my narrow escape, if I frame this as something good that happened to me instead of something done to me, I take that power away from him. Rachel's eyes lit up. That's brilliant. You're not the dumped fiancé crying into her pillow. You're the woman who dodged a bullet and is celebrating her freedom. Exactly, I said. We talked for hours that night, and with every hour that passed, more pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Rachel helped me notice things I'd been too close to see. The way Ethan's compliments always came with conditions. The way his kindness carried an expectation of gratitude. The way he had slowly, steadily pulled me away from anyone who might have challenged his influence. There's something else, I said as the night stretched on. Something about how his friends were positioned in that restaurant. Luke was filming on his phone. I saw it when I stood up to leave. Rachel's expression hardened. He wanted video. He wanted footage of you breaking down. The realization hit me like ice water. This wasn't just a public breakup. It was a production. Ethan had wanted proof of my humiliation. Something he could show people, something that would cement the story he was trying to create. That's why he looked so confused when I didn't cry, I said. He was expecting a specific reaction. Something that would make good content. Content for what? Rachel asked. I didn't have an answer yet. But I knew there was more to uncover. Ethan had planned this too carefully for it to be only about ending our relationship. There's something else going on, I said quietly. Some deeper reason I haven't seen yet. I need to find out why. Not to change anything that happened. Just so I understand what I was really dealing with. Rachel reached over and squeezed my hand. Whatever you find, I'm here. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. The woman I saw today in that restaurant, that's the woman I've been waiting to see for 4 years. I looked at her, this friend who had stayed beside me even when I couldn't stand up for myself, and I felt the first real stirring of something that might have been hope. Tomorrow I would start digging. Tonight I would rest. Over the next few days, Ethan's messages kept coming. At first they sounded confused. Then they started to sound irritated. Sunday morning. This silent treatment is immature. Call me. Sunday evening, I didn't do this to hurt you. We need to talk like adults. Monday, people are asking me what happened. You need to help me explain this properly. Tuesday, I heard you were telling people you're throwing a party. What is that about? Are you trying to embarrass me? I didn't reply to any of them. For the first time in 4 years, I wasn't shaping my actions around Ethan's comfort or expectations. The silence felt powerful in a way I hadn't expected. In the meantime, I started the practical work of untangling our shared life. The wedding had been scheduled for the following April, 6 months away. We had deposits on a venue, a caterer, a photographer, a florist, everything under my name because Ethan had insisted it made the paperwork simpler. Now I suspected the real reason was that he didn't want his name attached if anything went wrong. I called the venue first. The coordinator, Diane Foster, someone I had worked with several times during my career, was sympathetic when I explained. The deposit is non-refundable, she said apologetically. But under the circumstances, I can offer you a credit for any future event you want to host. Actually, I said, an idea forming as I spoke, I might want to use that space sooner than expected. Would next month work? Diane sounded surprised but intrigued. What kind of event are you planning? A celebration, I said. Of new beginnings. The caterer was just as understanding. The photographer offered to return half the deposit as a gesture of goodwill. The florist, Michael Bennett, someone who had become a friend through months of planning, told me he would gladly provide arrangements for whatever I was doing next and wouldn't charge for labor. Each call reinforced something I was only beginning to accept. The people I'd worked with had seen what I had missed. When I told them the wedding was cancelled because my fiancé had ended it, more than one responded with some version of, "I'm sorry, but honestly, I wondered how long it would last." What do you mean? I asked Michael, whose shop was downtown and who had helped me source sustainable arrangements. Every time you came in here, Michael said, you looked stressed and apologetic. You kept changing things because he wanted different flowers, different colors, different quantities. Most brides make changes, but you were trying to please someone who could never be pleased. That's not how wedding planning is supposed to feel. His words stayed with me long after I ended the call. By Wednesday, I had a clearer picture of what the next few weeks would look like. The narrow escape party would take place at the same venue where the reception had been planned, using the deposit that was already paid. The date would be 3 weeks from Saturday. Enough time to prepare, but close enough that the story would still feel current. I started putting together a guest list, and that was when things shifted. Ethan and I had planned the wedding together, which meant I still had access to our shared documents, including the master guest list. As I scrolled through the names, something made me stop. There was a separate document, one I hadn't created and had never seen before. It was labeled Priority Notifications and contained around 40 names. Ethan's friends, his colleagues, and a few family members I barely knew. Next to each name was a note: Wedding Update. Send immediately. I checked the document history and my stomach tightened. Ethan had created that list 2 weeks before the Saturday lunch. 2 weeks before he ended things. He had been planning his announcement for at least 14 days. The existence of that list suggested he had prepared a specific message for those people, something he wanted them to receive the moment the breakup became public. I dug further into our shared files and found a draft of the message he planned to send. As some of you witnessed today, I made the difficult decision to end my engagement to Claire Thompson. This was not easy, but I realized I could not commit to a future with someone who was not aligned with my values and goals. I appreciate your support during this time and hope you will respect my need for privacy as I move forward. The message painted him as thoughtful and decisive. It made me sound like the problem. Someone with misaligned values and goals. Carefully crafted spin designed to control how people would see the breakup. But there was more. In his sent folder, I found messages to his friends from that very morning, sent before we even arrived at the restaurant. Today is the day. Meeting at the restaurant at 12:30. I want you there to witness. This is going to be good. And then Luke Harris's reply. Finally. Been waiting for this. I'll record everything. They had planned it together. His friends hadn't been innocent bystanders who just happened to be there. They were co-conspirators in a deliberate public humiliation. My hands shook as I kept reading. Another message stood out. This one was sent the night before to someone named Olivia Grant. Tomorrow I'm ending things with Claire. I know you've been patient. I can't wait to be free and start our new chapter. I didn't know an Olivia Grant, but clearly Ethan Miller did. Well enough to talk about a future together while he was still engaged to me. I leaned back from my computer, trying to absorb what I'd uncovered. This wasn't just a breakup he had planned. It was a coordinated campaign. He had a replacement ready, an audience assembled, a narrative prepared, and a desire for proof of my collapse. The only thing he hadn't planned for was me refusing to break. My phone buzzed again. I don't understand why you're ignoring me. This isn't healthy behavior. For the first time since Saturday, I replied, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just no longer interested in conversations that serve your needs at the expense of my own. I think we're done communicating. His response came almost immediately. That's cold. I expected more from you. I turned off my phone and went back to the documents. There was more to uncover, and I was going to find all of it. The deeper I looked, the clearer the pattern became. Ethan hadn't been planning his exit for weeks. He had been planning it for months. The evidence was scattered across shared files and accounts, breadcrumbs I'd been too trusting to notice. Olivia wasn't new. By reviewing the call logs from the shared phone plan, I saw that they'd been communicating since early summer, 5 months before the public breakup. The calls started short and infrequent, then slowly became longer and more regular as the weeks passed. I didn't need to see the messages themselves. The pattern told me enough. Ethan had been building a new relationship while still engaged to me. The public breakup wasn't an ending. It was a transition. But the affair alone didn't explain the spectacle. If he wanted to leave me for someone else, he could have done it privately. The theatrics suggested something more calculated. The answer came from an unexpected source. Rachel called Thursday evening, her voice tight with restrained anger. I just heard something you need to know, she said. One of my coworkers is friends with Luke's girlfriend. Apparently there's been a lot of talk in their circle about what happened on Saturday. What are they saying? I asked. According to her, Ethan has been telling people for months that you're emotionally unstable, that you're clingy, controlling, that you throw fits when you don't get your way. He's been saying he was afraid of what you might do if he tried to end things privately. The air left my lungs. That's not true, I said. None of that is true. I know, Rachel said firmly. But that's the story he's been building. The public breakup hadn't just been for drama. It was designed to create witnesses. He wanted people to see my reaction so he could point to it as proof. But I hadn't reacted the way he expected. Exactly, Rachel said. And that's why he's panicking now. His entire plan depended on you having a meltdown in front of everyone. I thought of Luke holding up his phone. He wanted video, I said. Video proof that he was right to leave me. Video proof that I was exactly as unstable as he'd been describing. Instead, what he had was footage of me thanking him calmly and walking away. The manipulation was far more elaborate than I'd imagined. Ethan hadn't just planned a breakup. He had constructed an entire narrative where he was the hero escaping a difficult situation. Every piece had been calculated. The public setting. The witnesses. The recording. The pre-written messages. And without realizing it, I had dismantled the whole thing by refusing to play my assigned role. There's more, Rachel said. According to Luke's girlfriend, Ethan has been scrambling all week. He's calling people trying to explain why you didn't react the way he said you would. He's telling them you're in shock. That the breakdown is coming. That they just need to wait. He needed me to fall apart. He needed proof. And my refusal to give it was making him look like a liar. After I hung up, I sat alone in my apartment thinking about all the times over the past 4 years when Ethan had told me what other people supposedly thought of me. My friends think you're too intense. My mother thinks you're not ambitious enough. A coworker said you seem distant at parties. I had absorbed those comments. Adjusted myself. Tried to fix problems that might not have existed. It never occurred to me that Ethan had been the one planting those ideas. Poisoning opinions. Building a case against me one brick at a time. The scope of his deception was staggering. This wasn't a relationship that had simply failed. It was a relationship where one person had been systematically manipulating the other, all while building an exit strategy designed to destroy her reputation. But there was one thing Ethan hadn't counted on. I still had access to everything. Our shared documents. Our shared accounts. Our entire trail of communication. In his arrogance, he had never bothered to lock me out. He assumed I would be too devastated to do anything practical. Too consumed by grief to look closely at the evidence he had left behind. He had underestimated me. Maybe he had been underestimating me for 4 years. I opened my laptop and started organizing everything I had found. The timeline of his affair. The messages to his friends planning the public breakup. The draft announcement meant to control the narrative. The call logs showing months of communication with Olivia. I was not going to blast all of it online. If I did, I'd look vindictive, and that would hand him exactly what he wanted. More proof for the story he'd been telling. Instead, I was going to do something quieter and stronger. I was going to let the truth speak for itself. The narrow escape party wasn't going to be about Ethan at all. It was going to be about me. My freedom. My future. My right to define my own story. And if certain facts happened to come out along the way, well, that would simply be the truth-finding air. I started drafting the invitation. It wouldn't mention Ethan by name. It wouldn't even reference the breakup directly. It would invite people to celebrate a new chapter in my life. A closing of one door and the opening of another. The guest list would include my real friends, my family, and my coworkers. But it would also include some of the people Ethan had been cultivating as witnesses to my supposed breakdown. Let them see me thriving. Let them compare the woman he described with the woman standing right in front of them. And if any of them asked what happened, I would tell them the truth. Not a dramatic rant. Not a revenge speech. Just the simple documented facts of what had planned and why. The truth, I realized, was my most powerful weapon. I didn't need to embellish anything. Ethan had done the damage himself. I only needed to let people see it clearly. The next 2 weeks became a blur of practical work that kept my mind anchored. I threw myself into planning the party with an energy I hadn't felt in years. The event coordinator instincts I'd learned early in my career kicked back in as I transformed that reception deposit into something entirely different. Instead of white tablecloths and traditional centerpieces, I chose bold colors and eclectic decorations that reflected my actual taste. The the taste I had buried for years to match Ethan's conservative preferences. As words spread through my real circle, the guest list grew. People I had drifted from during my relationship started reaching out, hearing through mutual friends that something had changed. My college roommate, Sophia Martinez, called from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. "Claire, I heard the wedding's off," she said. "Are you okay?" "I didn't call it off," I corrected gently. "Ethan ended it in the middle of a restaurant in front of witnesses." There was a pause. "He did what?" "It's actually fine," I said, and surprised myself by realizing I meant it. "It's the best thing that could have happened, even if he didn't intend it that way." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said. "I was dreading that wedding. Every time I talked to you these past few years, you seemed smaller somehow. Less like yourself. I kept hoping you'd wake up and see what was happening." Her words echoed what Rachel had said. What Michael had implied. What the photographer and the caterer had hinted at. How many people had watched me shrink and stayed silent? "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked, not accusingly. Just genuinely trying to understand. "Because you would have defended him," Sophia said simply. "You would have explained away anything we said, and then you would have pulled away from us. We were all waiting for you to be ready." Ready. That word kept coming up. I hadn't been ready until Ethan showed me who he really was. So publicly and so deliberately that even my conditioned instinct to make excuses for him couldn't survive it. The invitation design came together quickly. It featured a simple image of an open door with light streaming through, and the text read, "You are invited to celebrate a new beginning with Claire. Please join me as I step into the next chapter of my life." No mention of Ethan. No reference to a cancelled wedding or a broken engagement. Just forward motion. But beneath the celebration, I was quietly preparing for something else. I kept thinking about who would be at this party. My friends would come to support me. But I knew the news would reach Ethan's circle too. Some would be curious. Some suspicious. A few might even report back to him. I wanted them to see a specific version of me. Not broken, not bitter, but genuinely thriving. I wanted them to notice how little Ethan's story matched the woman hosting her own celebration. And I wanted them to have access to the truth if they asked. I rehearsed talking points in my head. Not scripts, just clear, factual summaries. If someone asked why the wedding was cancelled, I would explain calmly that Ethan ended our relationship publicly in a restaurant, surrounded by friends he had invited specifically to witness my reaction. If they pressed for more, I would mention the pre-written messages, the recording, and the affair he'd been conducting for months. I wouldn't volunteer any of it unprompted. I wouldn't turn the party into an exposé. But I wouldn't hide from the truth either. The venue coordinator helped finalize the arrangements. The date was set for the third Saturday of October, exactly 3 weeks after Ethan's public announcement. The guest list reached 70 people. A mix of friends, family, and co-workers who had watched me lose myself over the past 4 years. My mother flew in from Salt Lake City, Utah 2 days before the party. The second she saw my face, she burst into tears. "Mom," I said, hugging her. "I'm okay." "Really?" "I know," she said, wiping her eyes. "That's why I'm crying. I've been so worried about you, and now I can finally see my daughter again." She helped me with the final prep, and we talked more honestly than we had in years. She told me about the concern she had carried, the conversations she and my father had about whether to step in, and the painful decision to wait and let me find my own way out. "I prayed for something like this," she admitted. "Not the humiliation part. The clarity. I wanted you to see him for who he really was." "Well," I said, "he certainly made sure I did." The night before the party, I received one last message from Ethan. It was longer than the others, more desperate. "Claire, I've been hearing things about this party you're planning. People are talking. I think you're making a mistake. Whatever you're planning to say about me, please remember I have my own side of the story. I've been patient, but if you try to make me look bad, I will respond. Think carefully about what you're doing." I read it twice, then deleted it without replying. He was scared. He could feel the narrative slipping out of his hands, and he didn't know how to pull it back. For months he had been building a story about unstable, dramatic Claire. But the woman people were seeing now didn't match that story. I went to bed that night with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Anticipation. Not dread. Not anxiety. Not that constant undercurrent of trying to predict someone else's reactions and adjust myself accordingly. Just simple anticipation for what was coming next. Tomorrow I would stand in front of the people who mattered to me and celebrate the end of something that never should have begun. Tomorrow I would let the truth do its quiet work while I focused on moving forward. Ethan had planned my downfall with meticulous care. What he had not planned for was my rise. The invitations went out on a Tuesday. By Thursday the phone calls started. People who had been at that Saturday lunch were reaching out through mutual acquaintances, trying to understand what was happening. The invitation itself was harmless, just a celebration of new beginnings, but paired with the rumors already circulating, it raised questions. Luke's girlfriend texted a friend who texted Rachel, asking what exactly I was planning. Mark's wife called one of my co-workers, gently fishing for information about my state of mind. Even people I barely knew suddenly wanted to attend, curious to witness whatever they imagined was coming. Meanwhile, Ethan was scrambling. Through multiple channels, I heard that he had been calling people all week, trying to get ahead of whatever story he thought I was about to tell. He framed the party as proof of my instability. Who throws a celebration 3 weeks after being publicly dumped? He insisted I was having some kind of breakdown. That this was a cry for attention. That people shouldn't encourage my behavior by showing up. But his warnings had the opposite effect. Every person he contacted became more curious. And when they compared his frantic explanations with the calm, composed woman they had seen walk out of that restaurant, the story didn't add up. The day before the party, I received a call I didn't expect. It was Emily Miller, Ethan Miller's younger sister. "Claire," she said hesitantly. "I heard what happened. And I heard about this party. I wanted to check in." Emily and I had never been close. I realized now that Ethan had kept me at a distance from his family. Still, she had always been polite, even kind whenever we crossed paths. "I appreciate you reaching out," I said carefully. "I don't know everything that happened between you and my brother," she continued. "He has his version and I'm sure you have yours. But I wanted you to know, I never believed what he said about you." "What did he say?" I asked. There was a pause. "That you were difficult. Emotional. That he was afraid to end things because of how you might react." She took a breath. "But Claire, I watched you at family events for 4 years. You were never any of that. You were accommodating to the point of disappearing. I used to wonder why you never pushed back on anything." Her words landed heavily in my chest. "I didn't push back," I said quietly, "because I thought that's what love was supposed to look like." "I know," she said. "And I'm sorry none of us said anything sooner. My mother's been asking questions this week. I think she's starting to see things differently too." After we hung up, I sat with that conversation for a long time. Emily Miller's call was the first visible crack in Ethan's carefully constructed wall. If his own sister was questioning his narrative, how many others would follow? The venue looked beautiful when I arrived Saturday morning for the final walkthrough. The large hotel event hall had been completely transformed. What would have been a traditional wedding reception now felt vibrant and deeply personal. Warm, bold colors filled the space. Deep oranges, rich purples, touches of gold. String lights crossed the ceiling, and the centerpieces featured sunflowers and wildflowers instead of the sterile white roses Ethan had chosen for the wedding. My mother found me standing in the center of the room, taking it all in. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," I said. "I feel free." Guests began arriving at 7 in the evening. Rachel was the first through the doors, followed by Sophia, who had flown in from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and then a steady stream of faces I hadn't seen in years. College friends I'd lost touch with. Co-workers from the early days of my career. Cousins and aunts who had always supported me but whom I'd kept at arm's length during my relationship with Ethan. Each arrival felt like a homecoming. These were my people. The ones I'd slowly pushed away because Ethan had convinced me they didn't understand us, that they were negative influences, that I needed to prioritize our shared life over my individual connections. Despite everything, they had come back. By 8 in the evening, the room was full, And the energy was exactly what I'd hoped for. Warm, celebratory, genuinely joyful. People laughed, reconnected, asked about my future plans. And then the questions started. "So," Sophia said, pulling me aside, "what really happened? The story Ethan has been telling doesn't match the woman I see standing here." I took a breath and told her the truth. About the planned breakup. The prearranged witnesses. The recording. The affair with Olivia that had been going on for months. I showed her the screenshots I'd saved, not displayed publicly, not passed around, but available for anyone who asked. Her face shifted as she processed it all. "That's sociopathic," she said finally. "He planned your public humiliation." "He did," I agreed. "And he miscalculated." Word traveled faster than I expected. By 9 in the evening, clusters of guests were deep in quiet, intense conversations. Phones were being passed around. Screenshots shared. The narrative shifted in real time. I didn't make speeches. I didn't accuse anyone. I answered questions honestly when they were asked and let the evidence speak. The real turning point came when Laura Reynolds, Mark's wife, approached me. She'd been at that Saturday lunch, sitting with Ethan's friends, watching everything unfold. "Claire," she said, her voice tight, "I owe you an apology." I waited. "When Ethan told us what he was planning," she said, "Mark made it sound like an intervention. He said Ethan needed to get out of an unhealthy relationship, and that having friends there would support him. I didn't know about the recording. I didn't know about the affair." He swallowed. "I thought we were helping someone escape a bad situation. Now I feel sick. I was part of something cruel and didn't even realize it." She looked at me, eyes glossy. "The way you handled yourself that day. You were calm. Composed. That's not how someone behaves if they're as unstable as Ethan claimed." She wasn't the only one having realizations. Throughout the evening, I watched Ethan's carefully constructed story collapse. Luke, who had filmed the breakup, was being confronted by his girlfriend about why he'd participated. Aaron, another of Ethan's friends, had stopped replying to his messages entirely. The social circle that had gathered to witness my humiliation was now distancing itself from the man who orchestrated it. And then around 10 in the evening, Ethan walked in. I saw him before he saw me, standing near the entrance, scanning the room with barely contained fury. He was wearing the button-down I'd given him for his birthday. Whether coincidence or provocation, I didn't know. The room didn't fall silent, but the energy shifted. Conversations lowered. Eyes followed him as he moved toward me. "Claire," he said, his voice tight. "What do you think you're doing?" I turned to face him fully, keeping my expression neutral. "I'm hosting a party, Ethan. You're not invited." "You're trying to destroy me," he hissed. "You're telling people lies. Showing them fabricated evidence." "I haven't told anyone anything that isn't true," I said calmly. "And everything I've shown came from our shared documents. Documents you created." His face went pale, then flushed red. "You went through my files." "Our files," I corrected evenly. "The same ones I've always had access to. The same ones you never thought to secure because you assumed I'd be too devastated to think practically." Around us, people had stopped pretending they weren't listening. Laura was watching with wide eyes. Sophia had her phone in her hand, clearly recording. "This is insane," Ethan said, his voice rising. "You're insane. This is exactly what I told everyone. You're unstable. You're vindictive." "Ethan," I said, lifting my hand slightly. "Look around this room. Look at the faces of people who know me. Who knew me before I ever met you. Do I look unstable to you? Do I look vindictive?" He looked. What he saw was a room full of people watching him with expressions that ranged from disgust to quiet pity. "You planned my public humiliation," I continued, keeping my voice steady. "You had your friends record it. You had messages prepared before lunch even started. You were having an affair with someone named Olivia while you were still engaged to me. All of it is documented. All of it is true." "You don't understand," he began, but the words lacked conviction. "I understand perfectly," I said. "You wanted me to break down so you could use that as justification for leaving. When I didn't cooperate with your narrative, you lost control of the story. And now you're standing here uninvited, proving to everyone in this room exactly who you really are. The silence that followed was devastating. Ethan looked around at the faces of the people he had tried to manipulate, people who were now seeing through the carefully constructed facade he'd relied on for so long. Then he turned and walked out. The party continued after Ethan left, but the atmosphere had changed. There was a collective exhale, as if everyone had just witnessed something significant and was processing it together. People approached me throughout the rest of the evening. Some apologized for believing Ethan's stories. Others expressed admiration for how I had handled the confrontation. I accepted their words graciously. But what I felt most wasn't triumph or vindication. I felt peace. The band I'd hired began to play, and the dance floor filled with people I loved. My mother danced with my uncle. Rachel was teaching Sophia some ridiculous move from our college days. Colleagues from work mingled with cousins I hadn't seen in years. This was what my life could look like going forward. Not smaller. Not diminished. Not arranged around someone else's expectations. Expansive. Connected. The party wound down around midnight. As the last guests were leaving, Sophia pulled me into a long hug. "I knew you'd find your way back," she said. "I just didn't know it would happen like this." "Neither did I admitted. "But I'm grateful it did." Over the following weeks, the fallout continued to ripple through Ethan's life. His carefully curated professional image took serious damage as the truth spread through overlapping networks of mutual acquaintances. Olivia, the woman he'd been having an affair with, ended things after learning the full extent of how he'd treated me. Luke Harris and Aaron Cole quietly distanced themselves. Laura Reynolds filed for divorce 3 months later, citing the incident as the moment she began re-evaluating her own marriage. As for Ethan himself, I heard through various sources that he struggled to rebuild his social standing. The persona he'd constructed, successful, principled, the victim of an unstable ex, had been thoroughly dismantled. People remembered how he'd shown up uninvited to my party, how his accusations collapsed under the weight of evidence, how the calm woman standing before them had never matched his descriptions. I didn't track his downfall closely. Once the party was over and the truth was out, I found I had very little interest in Ethan's life. My focus had shifted entirely to my own future. The event planning business I'd dreamed about for years finally began to take shape. I left my job at the event venue and started building something of my own. Something that reflected my actual vision rather than someone else's idea of what was practical or safe. Within 6 months I had my first clients. Within a year I had more work than I could handle alone. The relationships I'd neglected during my time with Ethan slowly rebuilt themselves. Friendships that had faded found new life. Family connections that had grown distant became close again. I learned that the people who truly loved me had never stopped. They'd simply been waiting. And I learned something else too. The version of myself Ethan tried to create, the small, accommodating, controllable woman who asked permission and apologized constantly, was never who I really was. It was a costume I'd worn because I believed that was what love required. Real love, I discovered, didn't require me to shrink. Real love celebrated who I actually was. Standing in my new office on the 1-year anniversary of that Saturday lunch, I thought about how differently everything had turned out from what Ethan had planned. He'd intended to break me publicly, to document my destruction, to use my pain to justify his choices. Instead, that moment in the restaurant became the beginning of everything good that followed. The woman he tried to humiliate became someone stronger than either of us expected. Ethan never fully recovered from the exposure of his true character. The pharmaceutical company he worked for quietly restructured his department 6 months after the party, and he was among those let go. His professional network, once a source of pride, became a liability as the story of what he'd done continued to circulate. The last I heard, he'd moved to another city entirely, trying to start fresh somewhere no one knew his history. Meanwhile, his former friends faced their own reckonings. Luke Harris's girlfriend left him after learning the full extent of his role in the public humiliation scheme, and Mark Reynolds's marriage collapsed under the weight of the questions Laura Reynolds began asking about what else her husband had been complicit in. As I locked up my office that evening and stepped into the cool autumn air, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. A year earlier, I'd been sitting in a restaurant, watching the man I thought I loved announce to a room full of strangers that he didn't want me anymore. I'd felt every eye on me. Felt the weight of expectation that I would crumble. Felt the entire world waiting for me to fall apart. Instead, I'd smiled and thanked him for his honesty. That moment, which Ethan had designed as my destruction, became the first step toward my freedom. Looking back now, I wouldn't change a single thing. The narrow escape party was never about revenge. It was about taking my life back, and never apologizing for being exactly who I was meant to be. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. Write in the comments which moment touched you the most. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new stories. And before you go, check out the story we've left here on the screen. We're sure it will also make you think and move you deeply.